He spoke to the river, and he listened to the river, his hand on his wife in the place their child would someday open her, where his mouth had already so often spoken her, as if he could take the child's name into his mouth from her body. Rebecca, Cleopatra, Sarah, and all the desert women who knew the value of water. While he painted her back, Jean remembered the first time in the cinema in Morrisburg that they sat together in the dark. Avery had touched her nowhere but her wrist, where the small veins gather. She felt the pressure move along her arm, his fingertips still touching only an inch of her, and she decided. Later in the bright foyer, she was exposed in invisible disarray. He had crawled a slow fuse under her clothes. And she knew for the first time that someone can wire your skin in a single evening, and that love arrives not by accumulating to a moment, like a drop of water focused on the tip of a branch. It is not the moment of bringing your whole life to another, but rather it is everything you leave behind at that moment. Even that night, the night he touched 1 inch of her in the dark, how simply Avery seemed to accept the facts, that they were on the edge of a lifelong happiness and therefore inescapable sorrow. It was as if long ago a part of him had broken off inside, and now finally he recognized the dangerous fragment that had been floating in his system, causing him intermittent pain over the years, as if he could now say of that ache, "Ah, it was you." I usually read for a very short time, and I'm going to read still for not too much longer, but I'm going to just add a little section that I don't normally read since we're here. And just to give you a sense of another kind of tone in the book, this is from the second part. Jean and Avery are back in Canada, and they have separated. Something occurs in Egypt which drives them apart, and they separate for a time. And there's another character, Lucian, who appears in the second part of the book. Sorry. The word love, Lucian said, is it not always breaking down into other things, into bitterness, yearning, jealousy, all the parts of the whole? Maybe there's a better word, something too simple to become anything else. But what word could be so incorruptible, she had asked? What word so infallible? And Lucian, to whom words were a moral question, had said, tenderness. Lucian's friend Pavel was a member of the Stray Dogs, a jazz orchestra of old men, old except for Pavel, the youngest by several decades. The cornet, Janusz, was the second youngest and proud of his youth, introducing himself to Jean as barely 70 years old in my stocking feet. Some wore an air of permanent, desiccated romance, while the faces of the others, including the leader, Mr. Snow himself, contained such ransacked grief one could barely behold them. All the dogs remembered the days of the Crocodile Club, the Quid Pro Quo, the Charnicot, the Black Cat, and the Perskiorko, the Persian Eye. They still dreamed of the queen of popular song, Hanka Ordunevna, and referred to her long affair with that old man, Julius, with disdain and jealousy. The stray dogs were united in age, in inexpressible misfortune, in exile that defined them so completely it was difficult to imagine for them any other destiny, nor in their synchronized swim of chordal progressions and bent sound. Uniting them too was the knowledge that one's life is never remembered in its vicissitudes and variety, but only as a distillation, a reduction of 60 or 70 years into one or two moments, a couple of images. Or as Hans Vorser, the MC at Warsaw's Round Club, might have said, from juice to juice. For each of them, the concepts of music and women were inseparable as music and loneliness. As ideas, music and women could not be disentangled, and in fact made an irreducible whole, like a molecule that's defined by its components and if altered, changes into something unrecognizable. Just as death and love and life are meaningless one without the other, so music, women, loneliness. All this was evident in a single note gnarled beyond recognition, in a single chord heavy as a woman's thigh flung across a man's chest in the night. They played a cellar full of abandonment, the guilty look at an off-guard moment, the coffee ring hardening into enamel at the bottom of a cup, the nub of a candle burnt down to the china saucer. And yet there was a kind of solace, too, the solace of emerging from the ruins to find that at least you no longer had any hair left to catch fire, or that for the moment your prosthesis was not aching. We want our music, explained Mr. Snow, to make people long to go home. And, he boasted, if the place is even half cleared out by the time we've finished one set, we're overjoyed, because for once it will seem better to be home alone in all one's misery than to be out listening to us. That's the kind of happiness we're capable of provoking. The Stray Dogs took each song apart, dismantling the melody painstakingly, painfully, sappers dismantling a lie, and then turned each single component around so many times it disintegrated. Then they put it again together from nothing, notes and fragments of notes, bent notes and breaths, squawks on the horns, and the reeds' empty-lidded beating of keys. By the time the melody reappeared, one was sick with longing for it. At first, said Janusz, following Mr. Snow in a piece was like following the tracks of a jackrabbit. I never knew where he'd land. But after a while, I could guess where his demented, sentimental mind might take him, and one or two times over the years, I even beat him there first. You should have seen the grin on his face, as if he'd opened a door and finally found himself home. I think that's the best thing I ever did for a man, taking away that loneliness for a bar or two. The Stray Dogs met regularly at Lütjen to settle matters, financial and otherwise. They maintain they met there on the first Thursday of every month, but the day was always changed at the last minute, and so far in 10 years it had never been a Thursday. That was as close to a schedule as they ever came, the never Thursday schedule. It's important to maintain delusion, said Lütjen, for the sake of order. Pavel always brought along to these meetings his little white dog with a pointed snout, a white cone ending in a black plug. Jean watched as the dog ate daintily from Pavel's hand. One certainly could not call Pavel his master, for in every gesture the man revealed his solicitude. In cold weather the dog wore a dignified navy blue knitted coat. In summer, Pavel carried a flask of water and he cupped his hand so the dog could drink. It was this little dog, their mascot, for whom the men named their orchestra, also referring to a certain cafe in St. Petersburg frequented before the wars by outlawed poets. It was their sad little Soviet joke, another way of hiding, a dilapidated homage, a wave across the abyss. It sat uncomfortably, just the way they preferred things. For a time they considered keeping the name they were known by in Warsaw, the Hooligans, but in the end it made them too sad, and they left, like everything else, the name behind.